Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson of World Alternative Media here, and you've heard me talk many times for many years about this attempt to eventually go to war with Mexico, maybe blaming Iran, maybe blaming Russia, whichever they may blame. This time they're going to say the cartels. Of course, we know who armed and funded the cartels in the first place. I'm going to go into this story here as there's calls for attacks on Latin America and including Mexico, where military is actually being deployed. And by the way, not only have I warned about this for a long time, I live in Mexico. I have for 5.5 years now, and I know exactly how nonsensical this all is. So I hope people listen because we're seeing the U.S. masking attempt to control Latin America with drug war, says Bolivian President Luis Arce, which again is not that controversial considering what they're doing right now and what they've done in the past, and of course Iran Contra and stuff like that. Operation Fast and Furious. Wall Street Journal reports Trump orders Pentagon to deploy 3 warships against Latin American drug cartels, and this is happening at the same time as Trump is claiming that he's working with Claudia Sheinbaum, the president in Mexico, on going after cartels, which she says is not true. And on this is from Rolling Stone. Team Trump is actually drawing up attack plans for Mexico, calling for airstrikes inside of Mexico. Absolute insanity, my friends. There's so much to go into here and why this is all happening. Before I do that, I urge people to check those links below and help support us if you can. I want to thank those who've helped donate after we had done a recent video where we talked about we're totally bankrupt and we are going under because we refuse to follow the narrative. We refuse to take money to follow the narrative. And so we depend on all of you out there. If you want to help us get rid of ads, the extent of ads that we have on our videos, this really helps. We're in massive amounts of debt, but you guys are keeping us up and running, and we truly appreciate you so much more than we could ever put into words. We are about $7,800 still away from being able to save ourselves here, but you guys have kept us up and running, and we cannot thank you enough. So there's gogetfunding.com, Patreon, and Subscribestar. Patreon, Subscribestar, as well as Exit at World Alt Media. If you pledge $4.99 a month or more, you'll get exclusive content. We also have a PayPal address, ancientwondersTelevision@gmail.com, and we have a Bitcoin address that you can scan on the screen here or donate via our the address in the description. We have a Cointree link with a bunch of different cryptocurrencies that you could donate in, if you please, including privacy coins as well. And we truly, truly appreciate it. Those links are in the description. Make sure to hit the like button, share on social media, hit the notification bell, and hit subscribe if you have not yet already on Rumble and BitChute. Now let's get into this. So, as this RT article says, U.S. masking attempt to control Latin America with drug cartel. Bolivian president says Luis Arce slammed the recent deployment of American armed forces in the Southern Caribbean region. Now, there's a lot of warnings about how this will lead to potentially bombs being dropped throughout Latin America, as well as world leaders being killed. Now, I'm banned from Venezuela for speaking out against Maduro going far back as 2015 and stuff. And I'm never going to promote him. I have a lot of Venezuelan friends who would never, ever accept the notion of him being innocent. But we have to understand there's two sides to this. They have people like Juan Guaido and these other recent attempts to overthrow the Venezuelan government with CIA operatives. And then we have a socialist like Maduro, who has caused unbelievable amounts of damage, including hyperinflation that has bankrupted people and starved people out. Venezuela should be one of the richest countries in the world, but it is not. Of course, it is. It has been heavily under attack. Yes, by the CIA. Yes, by Israel. Yes, by a lot of these countries. But it has also been extremely irresponsible, including in the times of Hugo Chavez, where people act like he did everything he did was all right. Ask a lot of Venezuelans, as I have, and they will point out the truth. He's the guy who put Maduro in charge in the first place. He's the guy who started a lot of this. He just died before the poverty struck. So, the people will praise him as a great leader, but he just died before, things really hit the wall. Now, what we've seen in recent years is multiple attempts of U.S. spies caught in Venezuela and attempts to overthrow the government. Now, obviously, I'd be very, very happy to see Maduro thrown out of power. He's a horrible human being, but again, they'll replace it with what? Now, this is something that there's a very good chance we could see the U.S. government actually strike Venezuela, actually kill Maduro. And this is something that we should be very, very much concentrated on, because this would be not good overall on the world stage. And it would perpetuate war that Trump says he's against, as he's being obviously nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize, yet sending Hellfire missiles to Israel to go after Iran preemptively. Then Iran attacks back, and then the U.S. attacks Iran. And then they say that they're planning to still do more attacks. They're still sending weapons to Ukraine despite these recent talks. And of course, a $1 trillion military budget that Trump signed, largest military spending budget in history. So be prepared for what comes out of that. Washington is using the so-called war on drugs, rather, as a cover for seeking political and economic domination in Latin America. Bolivian President Luis Arce claimed on Wednesday he strongly criticized the U.S. military deployment of to the Southern Caribbean, calling it an attempt to control the region rather than genuinely combat narcotics trafficking. The U.S. sent air and naval forces to Southern Caribbean Sea earlier this month in what the White House called part of a broader agenda or campaign against drug trafficking groups operating in Latin America, particularly those linked to Venezuela. So we're talking about like things like Tren de Agua. And I quote, "We know that behind this failed international war on drugs lies the real objective to geopolitically control Latin America for its natural resources and to dismantle organized peoples so that we cannot follow our own sovereign path," Arce said. Speaking via video link on the 13th the 13th Extraordinary Summit of the Bolivian Alliance of the Peoples of Our America. The Bolivian leader also called the U.S. government to address the root causes of drug trafficking at home, urging it to curb domestic demand for narcotics and dismantle the arms industry that this shallow culture that he argued sustains the drug trade. Arce also decried Washington's latest steps against Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro as an insult to regional sovereignty and a direct attack on democratically elected leaders. Last month, the U.S. administration expanded its crackdown by designating the Venezuelan-based Cartel de los Soles as a criminal organization, alleging that it is personally led by Maduro and includes other senior officials in the government and military. Maduro, who was indicted on federal drug charges by the U.S. court in 2020 during Trump's first term, has consistently denied the accusations, calling them politically motivated and part of Washington's broader campaign to topple his government. Earlier this month, tensions escalated further after the U.S. Justice and State Departments announced a doubling of the reward for information leading to Maduro's arrest, raising it to $50 million. While also claiming the Venezuelan leader is now collaborating with the Tren de Aragua, Sinaloa, and Sinaloa cartels. Now, again, this is totally nonsensical. We see Trump orders Pentagon to deploy 3 warships against Latin American drug cartels. U.S. destroyers are expected to patrol the South American coast, including waters near Venezuela. And this is happening as he says he's going, working with Claudia Sheinbaum, the president of Mexico, alongside the DEA to have this joint program in Mexico to go after the cartels. Now, this is just simply not true. And it's leading to Trump actually calling for drawing up attack plans for Mexico. He is literally doing this right now. Trump is eager to breach Mexico's sovereignty to attack cartels, officials say. Just don't call it an invasion. Well, I call it the same thing that we saw with Iraq, because, again, they were just going over there to help them stop bad combatants, and of course, Ba'athist Party. And we know how that all ended. Who armed and funded those cartels in the first place? The CIA. We know that. Every Mexican knows that. You know, there's no shock there. There's no shock value there. It's been exposed multiple times. I mean, there's Operation Fast and Furious, where Eric Holder, as the Attorney General, was heavily involved at the time in running guns to the cartels here. Of course, there's also the previous Iran-Contra scandal. And I've also interviewed people like Freeway Rick Ross, who talks about how he worked with the Nicaraguan government to run drugs from cartels into the United States to target Black families, to break up Black families, to cause further chaos and race division down the road. This is something that has been acknowledged many times, and the CIA is knowingly involved in this. But, you know, we've been talking about this for many years, as I said back a few years ago, that they would start to create this propaganda and normalize propaganda surrounding the idea that Mexico and the cartels are actually working with Russia or Iran. I remember they were talking about how they found IEDs at the border, the US border, and they will say, oh, well, these IEDs, they had Russian writing on them, and they'll target Iran or Russia or Iran with this because they'll claim both, who, by the way, are top allies with each other anyway, are involved. Of course, there are parades, military parades with the Chinese and the Russians in places like Monterrey in Mexico, and they've been doing that for a long time. And they've said multiple times, including in the previous administration, that the Mexican government is harboring missiles for Russia and Iran and all these other groups to go up against the US. I mean, total nonsense. But nonetheless, what they claim, and I've been saying from day one, the idea is eventually to create this tension and then normalize boots on the ground in Mexico, which I believe will happen. And I do believe there will be airstrikes. And it's exactly how they did things in Afghanistan as well as in Iraq. And of course, that snowballs. And what are they're up against these enemies that they armed and funded in the first place? ISIS, anyone, Al Qaeda, Mujahideen, Taliban, Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, all these groups that they arm and fund themselves that then they use as justification to go after. They're doing that. And by the way, before you say, well, what about fentanyl? Well, fentanyl is coming out in from factories in China and ending up at the US border in Mexico, yes, around Juarez, places like that, but then shipped over the border, and you don't see it anywhere in Mexico itself. Like it's very rare to hear about someone getting sick from fentanyl, because why would the cartel kill their own customers? It doesn't make sense. They depend on that money. They depend on tourism too. They're not gonna, like, this idea that it's such a dangerous place. Well, it's dangerous if you do really stupid things. And yes, there are some things that are messed up in Mexico, but like in any place, if you say, oh well, look at what's happening in Matamoros or in Juarez, as an example for all of Mexico, that's like saying, well, look what's happening in the south side of Chicago. Don't go to Sugarland, Texas. It's like, what? It makes no sense. It's so absurd, but nonetheless, it's the same metric that they use. And I have seen them using this for a long time. Again, the US has been openly arming and funding those cartels. Then the war on drugs came in. Then they started cracking down, mass imprisoning people, and that leads to with the prohibition, drug cartels inside the United States, as well as obviously just gangs, organized crime gangs. And we've seen that, of course, going back to alcohol prohibition. We know this. This is elementary stuff, but then they use this as another way to then go after Mexico, which, by the way, is one of the most conservative, one of the most family-oriented countries still left on Earth, one of the most anti-cashless society people on Earth, very cash-oriented, though they're going really hard in the paint on that with the Israel-loving Claudia Sheinbaum, the new president of Mexico, who has been pushing for this new shift into a cashless society with biometrics on CURP and tax on taxes and everything, and going into this biometric system by January. Crazy stuff. Oxo, which has shareholders like Bill Gates, it's like the Mexico's 7-Eleven or Circle K or whatever, is heavily doing the same thing, trying to push the cashless system and push for less cash and more digital transactions. All these things are very true, and they are going into that, but Mexico is pushing back against it more than almost any country in the world. And now they're being blackmailed essentially by the US government and other governments in the world to go along and push this further along against the people of Mexico, which is absolutely insane. Who was, by the way, one of the only countries that did not fully lock down, did not force everyone to wear masks, did not force everyone to get injections back in 2020 to 2023. Mexico, who was the country that, by the way, when we talk about cartels and everything, some of the few killings of Americans or Canadians in places like Puerto Vallarta, where I live, in the past 16 years have been people who went after children, who did horrible crimes against children. And meanwhile, in the US, if you do that, you get arrested by police in a place like Las Vegas, and then sent with free of charge over to Israel, extradition free, to live out the rest of your life without any consequences for these horrible actions. Again, how can people really attack Mexico over what some things that might happen in Mexico versus what happens in the US. You want to worry about illegal immigration, which I totally understand. Mass migration is not a good thing. Mexicans aren't very happy about it either when a bunch of Americans and Canadians flood Mexico and drive up prices like 5 times over the last 6 years. And by the way, the mass migration issue, totally an issue, but they're usually American trained gangs, and there's provocateurs that we see come up because statistically speaking, the average so-called like illegal immigrant from Mexico specifically, and I'm speaking Mexico specifically because I know a lot of people are shipped in from other countries to Mexico and then sent over the border. That's a CIA operation. But if you look at Mexican specifically illegal immigrants in the United States, the rate of crime among them is so dramatically low compared to per capita rates of blacks and whites in the United States that were born there. And of course, Mexicans that were born in the United States, Hispanic people, way different than the average person who's just going there to hang outside of a Home Depot and trying to get some work to send back to their family. Again, very family oriented culture. This is not justifying a lot of the stuff that has been happening with mass migration or illegal immigration into places like Texas and Arizona and New Mexico, where I know there's some really bad stuff happening. I am, and obviously the race situation where they, the DEI and the race system where they want to cause race wars, and they will give the benefit to people who actually do commit crimes unless they're white. I get that is a real thing, and that's insane. Nonetheless, let's be realistic here. So when we see something like this happening in like Trump pushing for a war on cartels in Mexico, it's going to cause chaos in Mexico. It's going to cause, and these cartels are propped up by the US in the first place. It's not a war meant to be won. It will only lead to more mass migration to the US, more emergency orders, and more pushes into this cashless system, the digital ID system. This is obvious to me, but for some reason, people lose it on this. They just totally miss the point of why they are doing this. Trump directs military to target foreign drug cartels, says the New York Times. The president has ordered the Pentagon to use the armed forces to carry out what in the past was considered law enforcement. This out on NBC. Trump administration weighs drone strikes on Mexican cartels. The administration has increased surveillance flights over Mexico as it tries to track the powerful cartels that dominate the fentanyl trade. Interesting, because obviously the US dominates the fentanyl trade, and of course they ship it in, and of course they go after your teenagers. They do these horrible things, and this needs to be understood. Again, fentanyl is one of the worst things that has happened in the drug world in modern history, for sure, and is part of an operation, because why would drug dealers or cartels kill their own people? This is happening by the hands of the state. I have no doubt about it. And again, when we have these attacks on these cartels, what are we going to do? We're going to cause violence in Mexico. With violence in Mexico and more poverty that will come out of this, by the way, a lot less money flowing, that needs to be pointed out. That'll lead to more people being desperate, which means more crime. Yet for 5 years, I walked down the street in places like Puerto Vallarta. I've been in Acapulco many times. I've been throughout Mexico, Michoacan, Colima, Mexico City, Guadalajara, Los Mochis, obviously all over the place, all through Sonora, Sinaloa, Magdalena de Quino. I've been in a lot of parts of Mexico, and I have to say, I've walked outside. I've never had a single problem ever walking outside. I cannot say the same for even when I visit Winnipeg, Canada, where I'm originally from. I enter the place, and immediately within an hour, someone is trying in some way to either harass or rob me, steal from me, and trying to intimidate me walking at night, even in the day. So it's just ironic that I always hear these things, this fear mongering around of violence and danger. Okay. Yeah, it does happen in Mexico. Understand that the CIA is a big part of those operations, and what they're doing here is in one way creating a new Cuban Missile Crisis so they could blame Russia or Iran or China for these attempts by cartels on the US, which again is total nonsense. But of course, this will lead to more mass migration, more violence, and more, I mean, MS-13 is an American gang that worships Satan. I mean, again, this is not what we see generally in Mexico. I know there is the Santa Muerte belief system in parts of Mexico, but generally we have here it's mostly a Catholic country, but it's very Christian nonetheless, and very family oriented. And meanwhile, in the U.S., you have pedophiles going free and being sent to Israel, extradition free because they're owned by Israel, where Mexico, to an extent, might be, but obviously there is this with people like Claudia Scheinbaum anyway. But there is this pushback against that. You ask almost anyone here, they are super against the establishment system. If you talk to them about some kind of so-called conspiracy theory, complete strangers in Mexico, the vast majority of them will listen, even if they don't know, they haven't heard of it, or they don't believe in it. They will listen and hear you out, and many of them will go, "Yeah, you're probably right." Weather modification, yeah, sure. All this stuff about the injections, all that. Mexico is a very open-minded place, and we hear these propaganda campaigns by the CIA and Mossad to go after Mexico all the time, and it's just complete nonsense. And then going after the rest of Latin America, this just, remember, they want perpetual war. They need perpetual war to bring in their emergency orders. The establishment does. President Trump doesn't actually have any actual power. He's just a puppet behind a podium like every other president before him. Obama did mass deportations and put kids in cages. Trump did. Biden did. Trump is doing it again. That is all just a symptom, due to a symptom of an issue that the U.S. created in the first place, and then they want to blame Mexico. How about not arming and funding cartels? How about not, running huge amounts of drugs over the border and putting them into the hands of, gangs and mafias inside the United States, to then prop them up, because mafias in the US are heavily run by the CIA as well. It's all fabricated. And then they use this as a narrative to go after Mexico, just like they did with Afghanistan, just like they did with Iraq, and just like they're doing right now with Iran, just like they're doing right now with Hamas, just like they're doing with Hezbollah, just like they're doing with HTS. I mean, it's all proxy. It's all by proxy. And I want to remind people of that before they fall into the trap of believing or buying these narratives, hook, line, and sinker, because this is very dangerous and will lead to more global violence and divide and obviously chaos. And out of chaos comes order. So this idea of going to war with Mexico and throughout Latin America has been around for a while. I've talked about it for a very long time. I said that they would do this, and now we're seeing it. If you've watched this for a while, you know this. And I hate to be right about this, but it just seemed like the vibe was always in that direction. Just living here for the last 5.5 years, seemed like this was a push. Trump put a battleship outside of the Bay of Puerto Vallarta back in 2020 to go after the new generation Jalisco cartel. And this is a cartel that's like the least violent, and basically, as I mentioned, have killed pedophiles here. But then again, the virtue signaling U.S. government will send pedophiles back to Israel. Oh my goodness. It's so frustrating. And people will just pick a narrative, whether it be the mainstream or mainstream alternative. I'm here to just say they're both bullshit. Let's get real here. Understand who's actually causing these problems and not fall for the solutions, a problem, reaction, solution, repeat, Hegelian dialectic that they always try to push on people. We, the collective, the greater good of the greater number, and the perpetuation forever of warfare and control. We must escape it. We must understand it to escape it. So I expect some big fireworks in the coming months in Latin America, and I hope to God I'm wrong. But nonetheless, the end goal is the bankrupting of humanity and the control of humanity and the enforcement of, obviously, the technocratic system, which they've been planning for a long time through China, Russia, elsewhere, utilizing this as, a guinea pig, a litmus to bring in digital IDs, CBDCs, food rations on social credit scores attached to algorithms with AI, taking over jobs, universal basic income, 15-minute cities. It's our job to withdraw from the system that controls us in such a way that makes us dependent on that when it arrives. So as I'm going to close this off, I urge people once again to go and get prepared today. I make basically nothing off of this. This is all about getting you guys prepared. HeavensHarvest.com for long-term storable foods that are non-GMO. There's organic kits, heirloom seeds, water filtration and storage, and books on how to get started. Use code WAM, W-A-M, and you will get 5% off as well as free shipping on your order. So make sure to get on this today. Save yourself, save your family today. There's no excuses to be sitting on your hands at this point. They're going for broke worldwide right now. Also, check out whambeef.com for 10 plus year shelf life, freeze-dried steak, 12 servings per bag. If you use code WHAMBEEF, all one word, WAMBEEF, you will get 20% off on your order. So I highly recommend people get on this today as they're going after the meat supply and they're going after the food supply in a big way right now, my friends. Check that out, whambeef.com, code WHAMBEEF. Also, something I'm really happy to present, as always, vni.life/wham, WAM, for super supplements, and not just any super supplements. We have Protovite, which is super cool. It's 100 plus vitamins, minerals, and phytonutrients. Great for cellular health, and of course, a full body system support, and of course, immune function. This is really cool. The before and after on this is absolutely amazing. Look at this, the toxins, the lack of circulation among the blood. And then 5 minutes after taking it, increased blood flow. White blood cells are 4 times bigger. The red blood cells are moving freely. This usually takes a month or more to do. This is over 5 minutes. I urge people to go and check out Protovite below. Use code WAM15, WAM15, and you will save 15% on your order. Now, as we close this off, I appreciate any help we can get. We have gogetfunding.com, Patreon, or Subscribestar. Thank you to those who've helped in the past. We literally could not survive without you, and we are still struggling a lot. We still have to raise a lot of money, but you guys are keeping us up and running, and we could not thank you enough. So gogetfunding.com. On Patreon, Subscribestar, and X at World Alt Media, you will get exclusive content, by the way, which is, I think, important to point out. If you send us questions, we'll do personalized video messages to you. That's $4.99 a month or more. We also have our PayPal address, ancientwonderstelevision@gmail.com. We have a Bitcoin address that you could scan on the screen here, of course, or check out in the description of the video in text form. And we have a Cointree link with a bunch of different cryptocurrencies that you could donate in, if you please, including privacy coins. We have a Teespring link in the description for merchandise that helps support us as well. And as always, you can find us on Telegram, Band.video, BitChute, Odyssey, Rumble, and Brighteon at World Alternative Media. We're on Hive, Steemit, and Vigilante.tv at Josh Sigurdson, and of course, on the Bad Guys TikTok and Instagram, World Alternative Media, Twitter and Getter at World Alt Media, and all the major podcast platforms except for Spotify, where we, of course, are banned. Hit that like button, share on social media, hit the notification bell, and hit subscribe if you have not yet already. And as always, my friends, live freely, live by example. That's the bottom line here. This is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.